USS Intrepid was the third member of the famed Essex class to be built, and overall, the fourth ship in the history of the United States Navy to bear the name Intrepid. Throughout her service in the Pacific Theater during the Second World War, she faced relentless enemy attacks, during which she was struck by no less than 4 kamikazes and an aerial torpedo. Yet, she refused to succumb to any of her injuries. After serving well into the Cold War era, she has been preserved as a floating museum and is moored along the Hudson River in New York City, where she stands as a tribute to the perseverance and sacrifice of the men of the United States Navy. Her keel was laid down on December 1, 1941, by the Newport News Shipbuilding Corporation, and she was launched almost a year and a half later, on April 26, 1943. She had an overall length of 872 feet, was 93 feet wide at her waterline, and had a standard displacement of just over 27,000 tons. Her flight deck was 862 feet long and 147 feet wide at its widest point. At the time of her commissioning, Intrepid was equipped with 3 aircraft elevators and 2 hydraulic catapults, and was designed to carry around 90 operational aircraft. Rated for 150,000 shaft horsepower, Intrepid was powered by 8 oil-fired boilers and 4 geared turbines, which each drove a shaft. She was capable of 33 knots and had a range of 20,000 nautical miles when cruising at 15 knots. Intrepid was equipped with 12 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns, which were located in 4 enclosed twin mounts near her island and 4 single open mounts located on the port side of her flight deck fore and aft. She was initially equipped with 10 quadruple 40mm Bofors mounts and 46 single-mounted 20mm Oerlikon autocannons. The numbers of these weapons steadily increased throughout the war until she had 17 quad 40 mounts and 65 20mm mounts by mid-1945. Intrepid was commissioned into the United States Navy on August 16, 1943, with Captain Thomas L. Sprague in command. After training in the Caribbean during early fall, the new carrier departed Norfolk on December 3 for the Pacific Theater. After arriving at Pearl Harbor on January 10th, she was assigned to Task Group 58.2 of the newly created Task Force 58. On January 16th, Intrepid got underway with her task group for operations in the Marshall Islands. Her pilots supported the 4th Marine Division during its assault on the island of Roy Namur between January 29th and February 2nd, before departing for the newly acquired fleet anchorage at Majuro on the 3rd. Intrepid was underway again on February 12th to participate in Operation Hailstone, the U.S. Navy's massive 2-day attack on the Japanese base at Truk Atoll. Intrepid's pilots began hammering Japanese positions throughout the atoll early on the morning of February 17th. That night, though, Intrepid came under attack and was struck near her stern by an aerial torpedo. The torpedo struck Intrepid just forward of her rudder, which was subsequently jammed in place to port at 15 degrees. By dawn, her damage control party had shored up the affected compartments, and she began making her way towards Eniwetok. Deprived of the use of her rudder, Intrepid was kept on course by her engines. By using full power on her 2 port screws and stopped to 1/3 on her starboard screws, Captain Sprague was able to keep her on course while making as much as 22 knots. After receiving orders to proceed to Pearl Harbor, which necessitated taking wind on her port bow, steering control was completely lost, and at one point, she was actually pointing in the opposite direction of where she was trying to go. As her men were not thrilled at the possibility of sailing the damaged flat top towards the enemy's homeland, they began working in earnest to reduce the effect of the jammed rudder. The first step taken was to lock the outboard starboard shaft. The effect of this was beneficial, but was still insufficient to keep Intrepid from swinging to the left. The next step was to move the aircraft on her flight deck forward of the island to act as a foresail. This worked for about 24 hours before control was lost again. The possibility of rigging a sail on her forward radio masts was investigated, but it was decided that the structure had insufficient strength. Instead, a sail made from cargo nets and canvas was sewn together and rigged on her port forecastle. With her starboard shaft locked, her planes at the forward end of the flight deck and the sail rigged, it was found that Intrepid could once again be adequately steered. She arrived at Pearl Harbor on February 24th, and after temporary repairs were effected there, she steamed to the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard in San Francisco for permanent repairs. Intrepid's repairs were completed in early June, and after sea trials and refresher training, she returned to the Fast Carrier Task Force in early September. Assigned to Task Group 38.2, her pilots struck the Palau Islands on the 6th and 7th of September, before striking airfields on Mindanao on the 9th and 10th. After conducting more strikes throughout the central Philippines over the subsequent days, she returned to the Palaus on the 17th to support Marine and Army units fighting there. More strikes in the Philippines were made the following week. After a week of rest, Intrepid was underway again on October 6th, and over the next 2 weeks her pilots pounded Japanese airfields and shipping on and around Okinawa, Formosa, and throughout the Philippines ahead of the amphibious landings that were scheduled for the 20th at Leyte. As dawn broke on the morning of October 24th, Intrepid's task group was steaming to the north of the island of Samar. Strikes were planned for that day, but were subsequently put on hold after a scout plane from Intrepid sighted the powerful Japanese surface force steaming through the Sibuyan Sea. This force, which was led by the behemoths Yamato and Musashi, consisted of 5 battleships, 9 cruisers, and 13 destroyers. By 10:25 a.m., Intrepid's first strike was over the Japanese force and beginning their runs. Commander William Ellis, Intrepid's air group commander, directed his dive and torpedo bombers to concentrate on the Japanese behemoths. Ideally, the SB-2C Helldivers and TBM Avengers would attack simultaneously to divide the anti-aircraft fire, but throughout the day, the dive bombers would consistently complete their attacks before the torpedo planes could start their runs. During the first strike, Ellis's men succeeded in buffeting the Musashi with several damaging near misses, 1 bomb and 1 torpedo hit. In addition, they scored a torpedo strike on the heavy cruiser Myoko, which forced her to withdraw from the action. As Ellis led the formation back to Intrepid, he passed the next inbound strike and ordered them to focus on the battleship they had just struck. This second strike added more punishing near misses, as well as 2 more bomb hits and 3 torpedo strikes. After several strikes were made by the aviators of Task Group 38.3, which was operating to the north of 38.2, Commander Ellis re-emerged over the Japanese formation, leading a group of 12 Helldivers and 3 Avengers. While reports are conflicting, as a strike from Intrepid's sister Franklin arrived at about the same time as her planes, the giant battleship took as many as 4 additional bomb hits and 11 torpedo strikes during the final strike of the day. Musashi capsized just after 7:30 that evening and slid beneath the waves to her grave 4,400 feet below. At 4:40 on the afternoon of the 24th, a Japanese carrier force was detected to the north by scout planes from Task Group 38.3. Once their final strike aircraft had returned, and believing that the Japanese center force was heavily damaged and retiring, the 3 task groups of Task Force 38 turned north for a showdown that their commander, Admiral William F. Halsey, hoped would finish off Japanese naval air power once and for all. On the morning of the 25th, Intrepid's pilots were back in the air, at first helping to defend the fleet from an inbound strike wave, before attacking the Japanese northern force off Cape Engano. One of Intrepid's Helldivers struck the light carrier Zuiho with a bomb, while another struck the carrier Zuikaku with a torpedo which knocked out her communications and hampered her steering. The U.S. strikes continued into the late afternoon, by which time Task Force 38 had flown a combined 527 sorties and sank Zuikaku, the light carriers Chitose and Zuiho, and the destroyer Akizuki. The next day, October 26th, Intrepid's task group attacked the fleeing center force as it retired back through the Sibuyan Sea and sank the cruiser Noshiro while damaging another cruiser and several destroyers. On the 28th and 29th, Intrepid's pilots pounded the Manila area. She was attacked by a swarm of kamikazes on the 29th, one of which clipped the port side edge of her flight deck. Although damage was minimal, 10 men were killed and another 6 were wounded. Intrepid continued conducting airstrikes against Luzon for the next week before retiring with her task group on November 7th. After a week of rest and replenishment, she was underway again for more strikes on Luzon. Shortly after noon on November 25th, Task Group 38.2 was attacked by a large contingent of Japanese land-based aircraft. Within minutes, 2 kamikazes slammed into Intrepid in quick succession, causing a massive fireball and killing a total of 69 men. However, Intrepid never left her station, and her men had the fires extinguished in less than 2 hours. The next day, she headed for San Francisco for repairs. With her repairs completed, she rejoined the fleet on March 13th and was assigned to Task Group 58.4 of the Fast Carrier Task Force. The next day, Intrepid weighed anchor and got underway for strikes against the Japanese home islands. These were dangerous times for the men of Task Force 58, and Intrepid got a taste of it on March 18th, when a twin-engine Mitsubishi G-4M bomber broke through a wall of anti-aircraft fire and turned toward her. The aircraft exploded as it hit the water about 50 feet off Intrepid's starboard side and showered the carrier with flaming gasoline and plane parts which started fires on her hangar deck. Fortunately, her damage control parties acted quickly and snuffed out the flames. The next day, her pilots joined the massive air attack on the Japanese naval base at Kure, during which 16 enemy naval vessels were struck and damaged to some degree, including the battleship Yamato and aircraft carrier Amagi. Intrepid then covered the badly damaged Franklin as she withdrew from the combat zone on the 20th, before shifting her focus to the island of Okinawa, where she spent the remainder of March softening up targets, before providing air cover and close air support after the invasion kicked off on April 1st. After spending the previous month dodging kamikazes off Okinawa, one finally struck home on April 16th. The plane dove into Intrepid's flight deck while its bomb, which became separated from the aircraft just before it struck her, landed in the water beside her. The aircraft went right through the flight deck and into her hangar deck below, where it caused significant damage and started several fires. A second kamikaze, which dove on her moments after the first, narrowly missed the carrier and crashed close aboard, as can be seen in this photo. Once again, her damage control parties quickly brought the flames under control, and in less than an hour, the fires were extinguished. 3 hours after the crash, she was once again conducting flight operations. 8 men had perished, and another 21 were wounded. The following day, Intrepid got underway for the West Coast for repairs. Once again made whole, Intrepid stood out of San Francisco on June 29th and began making her way west. After conducting refresher training in Hawaiian waters during July, her planes struck the bypassed Japanese garrison on Wake Island on August 6th as she made her way to the fleet anchorage at Eniwetok, where she received word on August 15th to cease offensive operations. Intrepid got underway on August 21st to support the occupation of Japan, where she remained until early December, when she returned stateside to San Pedro, California. After shifting to San Francisco in early 1946, she was decommissioned in March 1947 and placed in the Pacific Reserve Fleet. In February 1952, Intrepid was reactivated, and in March, she began the voyage to the Norfolk Navy Yard for modernization under the SCB-27C program. Her flight deck was reinforced to accommodate jet aircraft, as were her elevators. The twin 5-inch mounts near her island were removed, along with all of her World War II-era light anti-aircraft weapons. Her new anti-aircraft battery consisted of 8 single-mounted 5-inch .38 caliber guns, 2 of which were located on the edge of her flight deck on each quarter, and 12 twin-mounted 3-inch .50 caliber gun mounts. In addition, her boiler uptakes were rebuilt and angled aft to accommodate a single radar and communications mast. The 27C conversion program also equipped Intrepid with jet blast deflectors and steam catapults instead of the hydraulic catapults that were a part of the earlier SBC-27A conversion. On October 13, 1954, she became the first U.S. carrier to launch an aircraft using an American-built steam catapult, and 2 days later she was recommissioned and joined the United States Atlantic Fleet. After conducting her shakedown cruise during early 1955, Intrepid departed for her first deployment to the Mediterranean with the U.S. Sixth Fleet in May. After returning from her second deployment to the Mediterranean in late 1955, she entered the Brooklyn Navy Yard to receive the SCB-125 modernization. The major components of this work were the addition of an angled flight deck and an enclosed bow. Intrepid got underway in April 1957 to conduct her shakedown cruise and refresher training, and in September, she participated in the NATO exercise Operation Strikeback, which simulated a Soviet attack in the North Atlantic. In December, she conducted Operation Crosswind, which was a study of the effects of wind on carrier launches. The study proved that carriers could safely conduct flight operations without turning into the wind and even launch aircraft while steaming downwind. From 1958 to the end of 1961, Intrepid alternated between Mediterranean deployments and operating off the eastern seaboard. She was reclassified as an anti-submarine warfare carrier on December 8, 1961, and entered the Navy Yard at Norfolk the following March for an overhaul. In May, Intrepid was selected as the principal recovery ship for the Project Mercury space capsule and its pilot, astronaut Scott Carpenter. On May 24th, Carpenter splashed down northeast of Puerto Rico and was picked up about an hour later by one of Intrepid's helicopters. Intrepid continued operating off the East Coast, as well as in the Caribbean, over the next several years. After deploying to the Mediterranean once more during the summer of 1964, Intrepid joined in the ceremonies commemorating the surrender of the British Army at Yorktown in October. Intrepid subsequently operated off the East Coast into 1965, and in March, she was the recovery ship for Gemini 3 and its pilots, Lieutenant Commander John Young and Major Gus Grissom. After this duty, Intrepid steamed to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for a major overhaul. After her sea trials and shakedown were completed during early 1966, she got underway once more for the Western Pacific. From April 1966 to February 1969, Intrepid made 3 Vietnam deployments. During this time, she set what is believed to be one of the fastest aircraft launching times achieved by an American carrier. 9 A-4 Skyhawks and 6 Sky Raiders were catapulted in 7 minutes, with only a 28-second interval between launches. A few days later, planes were launched at 26-second intervals. During the same deployment in 1966, Lieutenant Junior Grade William T. Patton, flying a propeller-driven Sky Raider, shot down a jet-powered MiG-17. Following the conclusion of her last deployment to Vietnam in 1969, Intrepid shifted her home port to the Naval Air Station at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, from which she would operate for the remainder of her career. She spent the next several years conducting exercises in the North Atlantic, including submarine detection operations in the Baltic Sea and at the edge of the Barents Sea above the Arctic Circle. Intrepid also deployed to the Mediterranean several times during this period, with her crew enjoying numerous port calls throughout the region. But her time in the active Navy was quickly drawing to a close, and on March 15, 1974, Intrepid was decommissioned for the final time and placed in the Atlantic Reserve Fleet at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Originally slated for scrapping, Intrepid began a second life in 1976, when she hosted exhibits as part of the United States bicentennial celebrations. A successful campaign subsequently saved the carrier and established her as a museum ship along the Hudson River in New York City. In August 1982, the Intrepid C Air and Space Museum opened at Pier 86, and 4 years later, Intrepid was officially designated as a National Historic Landmark. After 20 years of sitting at her berth on the Hudson, it was announced in July 2006 that Intrepid would undergo repairs and renovations, as would Pier 86. The museum closed on October 1st in anticipation of Intrepid being towed to Bayonne, New Jersey in November. However, it was soon discovered that she was stuck in the mud and silt of the river. Subsequently, a $3 million program dredged this away over the next 3 weeks, and on December 5th, Intrepid was towed away. The total cost of the renovation was $120 million, $55 million for the ship and $65 million for Pier 86. Intrepid was placed back in her berth on October 2, 2008, and reopened to the public the following month. Intrepid earned 5 battle stars and 2 Navy unit commendations for her World War II service, and another 3 battle stars for her Vietnam service. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me do what I do, and I greatly appreciate it. Once again, thank you for watching.